In 2023, the Iowa Hawkeyes football team achieved a 10-4 record, played for the Big Ten championship, and finished the season inside of the top 25 with an average margin of victory of plus 0.6 points per game. Their scoring defense only allowed 14.8 points per game, which was fourth nationally behind Michigan in first place, Ohio State in second place, and Penn State in third place. All fellow Big Ten defenses. Iowa's scoring defense was better than any scoring defense in any other conference not named the Big Ten. And they were shut out by Penn State 31-0, shut out by Michigan 26-0, and shut out by Tennessee 35-0, and yet allowed less than 15 points per game. So how are they an elite defense and yet shut out in 3 games, 2 of which their opponents hung 30 burgers? That's because Iowa's offense was among the least prepared and worst coached in college football history. Iowa fans and even non-Iowa fans such as myself are very thankful to God that Brian Ferentz is gone and no longer the offensive coordinator. And that's serious. That's not playing or even making a joke. Iowa's offense last year was a disaster. They only scored 15.4 points per game, 132nd out of 133 FBS teams. Only one FBS team had a worse scoring offense, and I do not want to know which team had an inferior offense to the awful Iowa offense. Iowa's offense didn't do the defense any favors either by throwing 11 interceptions despite only throwing 9 passing touchdowns on the season, and Iowa's offense had problems with fumbling footballs all year round. But no worries for Iowa fans or anyone who loves watching elite defenses, because I strongly believe is a better way of phrasing it, that Iowa's defense is going to be the best in college football this season. They return nearly all of their starters from last year, have a schedule that allows them to build depth, to work through some new players now that Cooper DeJean is gone and someone will have to step up to replace him. And if the offense is just a little bit better, if there's just a modicum, a tiny bit of improvement, and the offense can do a better job of controlling the clock and taking care of the football at minimum, this defense will be better rested and therefore play a even more superior brand of football than they played last year, which would be pretty hard to do, but Phil Parker's their defensive coordinator. Before we continue this video, please hit that like button so we can get this video into the algorithm and reach more amazing college football fans like yourself. And also subscribe to the channel and click the notification bell so that you can get notified when we release new college football content here on College Football with Sam. We are primarily a Big Ten themed channel. However, we do cover the entire sport, as there are now 134 FBS teams, and there are close to 70 Power 4 teams. Rest in peace to the Pac-12. And subscribing to the channel obviously helps, because the more subscribers we get, the bigger the channel is. And it also helps you because we will be doing a giveaway at 20,000 subscribers. So stay tuned for that. Hit the notification bell to get new content. And also, comment your thoughts down below. Do you disagree with me, or do you agree with me that Iowa will have the best defense in college football in 2024? Whatever your answer is, comment your thoughts down below. I'm pretty sure that even if the best defense in college football does not reside and play its home games in Kinnick Stadium, that it will reside in the Big Ten Conference, because Ohio State, Michigan, and Penn State, along with Iowa, return a lot from their defenses last year, which were unanimous top 3, top 4, maybe at worst, depending on where you look, top 5 units. And the statistics don't even tell the whole story, because Penn State lost most of their defensive starters by the Peach Bowl and didn't have their defensive coordinator in that game either. And Ohio State's defense played with virtually no offense against Missouri in the Cotton Bowl. So the statistics are even manipulated to that degree. But Michigan only allowed 10.4 points per game, I believe, last year. I think my memory serves me correct. Iowa's last season, if you take away any non-offensive points that Iowa's opponents scored on them, whether that be pick sixes or fumble sixes or anything else, safeties included, Iowa's defense only allowed 13.7 offensive points per game last year. That was third nationally. They only allowed 0.207 offensive points per play, also third nationally. They only gave up 281.9 yards per game, fifth. They were first in opponent yards per play, only allowing 3.9 yards per play, per one singular play. Averages, people, not yards per carry on the ground or yards per pass attempt, although only allowing 3.9 yards per pass attempt would be extremely impressive. And Iowa's secondary was close. In terms of completions, they only allowed 9 yards per completion, which was first nationally, and that was the strength of their defense last year, was pass defense. However, despite all the elite qualities that Iowa's defense had, being top 5 in yards allowed per game, points allowed per play, points per game, yards per play, holding opponents to, I think, like nearly 2 field goals per game, which is a lot of field goals per game, but when you take into account how bad the offense was, it's very impressive that they rarely managed to break down. Phil Parker's defenses are pretty much always good at forcing turnovers, especially interceptions. Iowa last year had a down year in that category. They only forced 1.1 takeaways per game, which was 111th. However, turnovers, as discussed by Phil Steele and other college football analysts, really anyone you talk to, it's consensus that turnovers to a certain degree are flukish and by chance. Since Phil Parker is consistently known for coaching his secondaries and defenses to take away the football, I imagine that Iowa will be better this season at forcing turnovers, especially due to the fact that they lead the Power 4 in returning production on defense. They bring back 86% of their production on defense from the 2023 season. They're second in all of the FBS. They're only behind Rice, who's first in defensive returning production. I think they bring back 87% or maybe 86% as well, but they have a higher number in the 10th place. The starters on defense are nearly identical to the ones in 2023. Of course, with a few changes, Cooper DeJean is gone, but linebacker with Jay Higgins and Nick Jackson, those are the same 2 starters. They both announced their return. On the defensive line, you have Deontay Craig at left defensive end, Ethan Hurkett at right defensive end, Aaron Graves at left defensive tackle, Yaya Black at right defensive tackle. These are all projections, but with the amount of returning starters and returning production, this will probably be what the starting defense looks like exactly. At the cash position, you have Sebastian Castro. At left corner, you have new starter John Nestor coming in. At strong safety, you have Xavier Nwampka, who held offers from Ohio State coming out of high school and was a 5-star player, but chose to commit to Iowa. And at free safety, you have Quinn Schulte. And at right cornerback, you have Jermani Harris. Those are the 11 projected starters for the 2024 season for Iowa's defense. The strength of this defense is in its passing defense department, in the secondary and at linebacker. The weakness or the weak link, the position that is the worst on this team, is the defensive line. And they should have a top 10 defensive line nationally in 2024. They should. Yaya Black, Deontay Craig, Aaron Graves, maybe even Ethan Hurkett, who I think is the most inexperienced and least proven member of the defensive line, and he still had a great year last season. They could all be All-Americans and will easily, in my opinion, all be All Big Ten caliber players and will receive awards at the end of the season. But the pass defense is the strength. Iowa's defense, opponents passed on it for about 34 attempts per game, 33.7 attempts per game to be exact. And Phil Parker's secondary, with Cooper DeJean, and he was injured for the last third of the season, was out for the Big Ten championship game, out for the bowl game against Tennessee, and out against Nebraska, Illinois. I think he suffered the injury that he had in a non-contact practice injury after, I think, maybe week 11, week 12. I forget exactly. But the secondary was already dinged up at the end of the year, and even factoring that in, Iowa's secondary only allowed opponents to complete 56.14% of their pass attempts, and they only allowed opponents to gain 9 yards per completion, which was first in the country, ahead of Ohio State's secondary, who led Michigan's secondary, I think the most explosive and perhaps the best secondary in all of college football last year, in terms of averages, performance, and how the players look to be in future NFL drafts and the most recent NFL draft in 2024. I do think Michigan or Ohio State had the best overall secondary last year. Iowa was ahead of both of those in yards allowed per completion. Ohio State, they allowed 9.7 yards per completion. Michigan, I believe, and Ohio State, I know for a fact, allowed less yards per pass attempt. But Iowa's secondary is a secondary, really a defense overall that just sits back, is very fundamentally sound. Iowa was top 5 in penalties per game, and in a good way. Like, they were one of the top 5 teams in the least amount of penalties committed per game. I hope I'm saying that right. They're very good, and were and are very good, sound, disciplined, and overall, when you look at how they play ball, they sit back, they're sound, they don't allow big plays, they don't allow busted coverages, and they let you make mistakes. So that shows in their stats outside of the turnover margin. They had a negative 0.5 turnover margin per game, and they only forced 1.1 turnovers per game. They just couldn't follow through at making the interceptions, recovering the forced fumbles. They had nearly 1.5 forced fumbles per game, but they recovered less than 1 forced fumble per game. So they weren't able to scoop up the balls that they forced out. And I think that is really the only weakness for this defense. Overall, they have a weak link on the defensive line, but their defensive line will still be one of the best in the country and in the Big Ten. They no doubt have the best starting linebacker duo in all of college football, and their secondary is up there with Ohio State's, with Michigan's, with Georgia's. I mean, this defense, I'm telling you, it's going to be the best in college football. And their best players, as I've already said for, 3-4 times now, they're all in the passing defense department, but that's not putting the defensive line to shame. It isn't. These D-line players, these defensive linemen, would be starting or at minimum in the 2-deep rotation at every Power 4 school. This entire defensive line might be starting at Georgia. Like, if Georgia could trade their defensive line with Iowa's, or just bring Iowa's defensive line in, Georgia would probably get better and or start all of Iowa's defensive linemen over their defensive linemen, outside of maybe Mikel Williams. And he might be their best defensive lineman and best edge this season. That's how good Iowa's defensive line is. But Nick Jackson and Jay Higgins in that secondary are full of NFL talent. Nick Jackson had over 100 tackles last season. Same with Jay Higgins, who had nearly 200 total tackles. They each had a forced fumble. Nick Jackson had 2. Jay Higgins had a pick, 2 sacks. Nick Jackson had 4 sacks and 8 tackles for loss. He's the weak side linebacker, so they often send him on blitzes much more than Higgins, who's really the centerpiece of this whole defense. Sebastian Castro had 8 tackles for loss, 8 passes defended, and 3 interceptions, and he was the highest graded returning defensive back in the Big Ten per Pro Football Focus. I'm telling you, this defense is loaded. It will be the best in the country, and the stat sheet and the overall performance will reflect that, and may I add, it will not be close. Iowa will far outclass all other defenses in college football if their offense is just top 100. And top 100 is just that modicum of improvement, whether it's by this margin or this margin or this margin. I mean, help all of college football if Iowa's offense improves by this margin or by this margin or this margin. Then we'll all be in trouble, because Iowa with a good offense and an elite defense and special teams would be a top 10 team in college football basically every year. And I think especially this year, where you're going to have a down year at quarterback and there's going to be chaos with all the conference realignment and 12-team college football playoff. But just a top 100 offense where Cade McNamara performs better than he did last year and better than Deacon Hill, where the O-line improves, where the run game improves and Iowa better controls clock and takes care of the football. This defense could only allow 10, 11, 12, 13 points per game. And maybe if the offense improves and the defense, if everything goes their way in terms of injuries, in terms of preseason development, they could maybe only allow 9 or 9.5 points per game. I mean, check out their schedule. Seriously, it's easy. The only top 4 team they play, actually, you could extend it to top 5. The only top 5 team in the Big Ten that they play, and not top 5 nationally, top 5 in projected Big Ten standings, is Ohio State on the road. That's it. Every other game that they play, Iowa will be favored in, and their defense will probably lock down all other 11 offenses outside of Ohio State's. They could even compete against Ohio State's offense and limit them if Ohio State's offensive line is not playing at a great caliber, and if Will Howard doesn't control his turnovers and doesn't improve from the player he was at Kansas State. I've already said enough, but I just wanted to deep dive into this because Iowa's defense is very underrated. Very, in fact, criminally underrated entering this season. They're rightfully placed as a top 5 defense by every preview website, magazine, and analyst that I see pretty much. Maybe some only have them top 10, but I have not seen anyone place them as the best defense in the country this season. And I did my research. I poured through the depth charts, returning production. I take into account how much I respect the position coaches and defensive coordinators. And my goodness, Phil Parker's the best defensive coordinator in the country, with much of Michigan's defense leaving from last season, along with Jesse Minner and all 3 of their main position coaches. That unit will at least take a slight step back. Ohio State, they bring back most of their defense and defensive coordinator Jim Knowles, but they do lose both of their linebackers. Josh Proctor was an underrated safety, and their defensive line, especially in terms of alignment and scheme, but also upside, has some questions. For Penn State, it's that, but with the secondary, their front will be one of the best in the country. Iowa is just the most balanced defense with the best defensive coordinator. They return the most production and have several NFL players. That is a recipe for great success and perhaps one of the best defenses of the 21st century. Thank you all so much for watching. I want to give a quick shout out to my Patreon members. Thank you for sponsoring this channel and video. Thanks to Crash2488 and Brasco Rascal for sponsoring this video and channel as Heisman members. Thanks to Chris Lane, Conor Little OH, and Ismar for being All-American members. And thanks to John Lynn, Roaming Gnome, Matthew Sale, Austin Christmas, and Janisha Cockrell for being All-Conference members. Sign up today and support the channel. I'd really appreciate it. I already appreciate you watching these videos, and your support is always appreciated and never expected. It'd be awesome if you would join the Patreon page. If you sign up as a Heisman member, after 6 months you get signed College Football with Sam merchandise, and the All-American membership is $10 a month. All-Conference is $5 a month. Check that out via the link in the description or the pinned comment. Same with my merchandise store. You can get an Iowa-themed College Football with Sam t-shirt or a theme with the colors of every other Big Ten school. 18 different t-shirts with the themes and colors of all Big Ten schools. Check it out via the link in the description or in the pinned comment. Thank you so much for watching, and have a great day.